Hello, my name is Miguel Fra, and I am your presenter for the Falcon IT Services Cybersecurity 2024 Part 6 Cybersecurity Policies. Creating policies. Create a security policy that covers multiple facets of computer security based on your company's needs. Distribute the policy to your employees and have them agree to abide and sign the policy. Falcon IT Services provides a template that you can modify. Just ask us for a copy and we'll provide it to you. Our recommended policies contain our baseline policies, which are the minimum policy requirements that we recommend all our clients to have. And if you visit our website, www.falconitservices.com, and you could find under the resources menu recommended best practices, and there you will find a basic template of policies that you could modify and use for your own internal organization's use. Now, it's very important when you create policies to have them in writing and include them in your onboard documentation so that new employees can read, be aware of your acceptable use policies, IT security, and other policies. They can understand them, be aware of them, and abide by them. And your documentation should be included in any onboarding materials that you have. IT policies and procedures are intended to keep companies, their employees, and their customers safe. Your organization should have a written acceptable use policy and best practices included in the employee training manual and/or onboarding documentation. Depending on your organization's industry and the type of data that you work with, there may be additional policies that you may need to implement. Additional security may be required if you want to be compliant with HIPAA, FISMA, GLBA, and other regulatory mandates, as well as with CTPAT, PCI, and other industry-specific frameworks. Organizations and the individuals within them have unique needs. Therefore, policies should not be absolute. Implement a review process for policy exception requests. The objective should be to balance usability and user satisfaction while maintaining an acceptable level of security based on risk. Now, what do we mean by this? When you create policies, sometimes you're going to have exceptions that need to be made. So, for example, if you have a policy that states that you should not allow your employees to visit websites that have to do with social media, well, you may need an exception for that. You may hire a social media specialist, and that person may need it. So there should be a review process. However, as I often see, what should not happen is that employees go through that review process, and the person that's doing the review just goes ahead and accepts everything. You should do a little bit of research, find out really if the exception is really absolutely needed, and if it fulfills a business need, and if it does, then it's okay to whitelist. Otherwise, it should not. Create a statement defining what disciplinary actions will be taken with employees who violate security policies. Policies should be enforced if you wish to have them taken seriously. Define who in your organization will be designated as the authorized person to approve changes, dictate policies, and make important business decisions. We default to baseline set of policies such as password hygiene, backups, and basic security principles. There are many other policies that need to be considered by every organization based on their risk level, their aversion to risk, their budgets, and other factors. If you want to go beyond the baseline, okay, the very basic, you should talk to us and have somebody in your organization who will be designated as the policy maker discuss with us what policies they would like implemented, what they need to secure, what regulatory needs they may have, and we will help them draft policies. When you draft your policies, send us a copy so that we could help you implement them from a technical standpoint as well as follow them. We also provide those policies to our help desk staff so that when your employees are calling our help desk, we're aware of your policies and we can abide by them as well. If you handle sensitive data, create a policy that defines where sensitive data could be stored and how it should be handled in its 3 states: at rest, in use, and in transit. Now, as we had mentioned in a prior video, data could be at rest, meaning when it's being stored and not used. It could be in use, meaning when you've accessed it and are acting upon it, and in transit, when you are transmitting it from one place to the other. So you should define where sensitive data could be, or how it could be used in all three states. Optionally, set up a DLP, which is a data loss prevention, and auditing to ensure that your sensitive data is not being carelessly mishandled or maliciously leaving the perimeter via unauthorized channels such as email, file uploads, or copy paste to portable media. Classify your data even if you don't use DLP. Create policies that dictate what type of data falls under what category and how it could be used and stored. So even if you're not using DLP software, DLP is data loss prevention. It's software which basically helps you contain your information to make sure it's not leaving through unauthorized channels. So even if you're not using that software, at least classify your data, right? Your documents, your data, whatever you work with, as one form of classification could be public, private, sensitive, or secret, right? In this example, we're classifying data in 4 categories. Public meaning that the data could be given to anyone, transmitted anywhere, posted anywhere, all the way through to secret, which could mean that the data can only be viewed on a need-to-know basis by certain people. So even if you're not using DLP, when you create a document, think about it and think, should this be public? Should this be private to our internal company use? Should it be sensitive, meaning only for certain departments, or should it be secret, meaning only for certain people? And then you could watermark your documents, or use metadata, or just simply at the top, at the header, just write, sensitive or secret or whatever, however you want to classify it. That way, if somebody accesses that document before they can act on it, or if they're thinking about emailing it to someone, they see that it states sensitive or secret, then they know that they shouldn't be emailing that document out. And of course, create policies so that your employees understand how to treat different types of classification. So they know that, what they can transmit, or who they could share something that's categorized in one of these different categories. Create an AI policy. According to a survey from the Conference Board, 56% of employees are using generative AI at work, but just 26% say that their organization has a generative AI policy in place. While many companies are trying to implement limitations around using generative AI at work, the age-old search for productivity means that an alarming percentage of employees are using AI without management's blessing or without thinking about potential repercussions. For example, after some employees entered sensitive company information into ChatGPT, Samsung banned its use, as well as that of similar AI tools. So in this particular case scenario, an employee inside Samsung wanted to have AI take a look at his code, his computer code, to see if the AI could better it. So what the result is that he basically copied and pasted the code onto the AI. Now, once AI has information, it is used to learn further, and that information is then used for future output. So another company is now able to, the AI could learn from that person's code that he input, and then the AI could then give that to another entity. So for example, in this case, it was intellectual property. It was code that Samsung considered intellectual property, and then that started being used to give coding information to others. So that's why it was banned. So and we all have heard, I'm sure, of the of other examples such as this one. So just remember, what you input into an AI, it uses to learn, and then that could be part of an output that's being used for someone else. So create a committee to whitelist AI usage. based on reviews, experiences of other people, reviews that you find online, legal factors, and other factors. So by creating a whitelist, I mean the committee would analyze which tools can be used and then approve them. And not just approve them, but approve how they can be used. So define an acceptable use of the AI tool that's whitelisted and start from an allow rule rather than a deny rule. If you'd use deny rules, there are other scenarios that you cannot possibly have thought of. So, for example, if you have a rule that states that you could use the AI, you cannot, a deny rule that you cannot use AI to give out medical advice. Well, if you're a medical company and one of the employees decides that they're going to use AI to draft a marketing brochure, right? It's not really giving legal advice. They're just creating a marketing brochure. But in that marketing brochure, the AI could possibly state some information about the product that is considered to be giving medical advice. So that's why it's better to use an allow rule. The allow rule would state what can be done, and anything else that's outside that scope has to go back to the committee and be approved or whitelisted. Define processes for confirming copyright and accuracy before posting any AI-generated content online. So AI is prone to something called hallucinations, right? Which is, another word for hyperbole. It makes up things. So before you post something online, there should be a process for confirming that it's not using part of other people's copyrights and that the information is accurate. And of course, we all know the famous scenario where an attorney used AI to create some type of legal document, and then in the AI stated prior cases, right, which never existed, and it just made these up. And the attorney, was reprimanded by the judge in this case, and it wasn't really his fault. I mean, he used the tool that he thought was supposed to be accurate. Now, so also refrain from inputting sensitive data into AI models. Check the output of your AI for bias, harmful and offensive content, as well as hallucinations before posting or implementing the output. Require employees to disclose their use of AI and never misrepresent the work of AI as your own. Never make legal, HR, medical, or financial decisions that are recommended by AI before you consult with a human professional. And because AI is new technology, AI policies should be frequently reviewed and updated. Do not grant AI-infused apps with open authentication, APIs, or other forms of delegated access without research and without getting approval by the committee. So as we know from some of our prior videos, open authentication or APIs are ways for two systems to interact with each other. So if you have an app, for example, that's an AI, you can grant that app access to your mailbox to read your email. So you should always consider, okay, what is in the email that I'm granting this app access to, either through an open authentication or API, because the AI is going to have access to that, and make sure that you're aware of what it's going to have access to and whether or not it should or should not. So BYOD, so 3 out of 4 workers use personal and often unmanaged phones and laptops for work, and nearly half of companies let unmanaged devices access protected resources. Now, to me, this is a bad idea. I never recommend any type of BYOD. Generally, most of our clients do not use do not allow personal laptops to be used. However, it's hard to control, so you need to create a policy to make sure that your employees know that resources that cannot be locked down, they should not be accessing them through a personal device. So to give you an example, in the old days, you had your information sat within your workplace, in your premise, on your server, and you had to come into work and use a laptop or a desktop in order to access them. So it was easy to lock down your data. Now today there's a lot of accessibility, right? A lot of applications and data have moved to the cloud, and it's accessible from anywhere. So to give you an example would be email, right? In the old days, you'd have to come into work, open up Outlook, and it would connect to your local server, and that's how you used email. Now you can access email from anywhere. So your employees must understand that they should not be accessing their email from their personal laptop at home, that they should only use a company device, and you should have a policy for that. And the reason is you don't know the security level of somebody's personal home computer, and if their computers are have an infection or some type of malware, there are malwares that will steal the passwords, that will steal the token, the authentication tokens or cookies, and completely be able to bypass two-factor authentications and give a bad actor access to that person's mailbox. So that's why it's not a good idea. Phones are generally more safe. However, now there have been we're seeing this in Europe, where some of the phone application repositories are where had exclusivities. Now it's being the other repositories are being allowed in. So now you will be able to install applications not just from Android and not just from Apple, but the regulators are asking these companies now to allow third parties in. So it's kind of the equivalent of side loading, right? Where you're not going to know the level of security that these applications have. So if you have a company issued phone and you could provide a policy that prevents employees, or you can lock them down to prevent employees from installing apps, that's great. But always make sure that you have a policy that states that what can and cannot be used in BYOD. Shadow IT is the use of non-sanctioned hardware, software, or services without the knowledge of IT staff or company management. It could represent a high risk for some businesses. So create a policy that details what applications and services are permitted for work use. Shadow IT expands the attack surfaces by creating backdoors through misconfigurations, increasing costs, strain, and consumption of the help desk staff. Compliance, qualification issues, and data loss brawls can also be an after effect of shadow IT. And there's also data retention, loss depth, and inability to control an organization's data through a data sprawl. So create a committee that approves applications and online services for specific use scenarios. Whitelist applications based on reviews, experiences of others, terms and conditions, and other factors, and disallow usage of all non-whitelisted service and applications. So in short, BYOD is an employee that uses an app or an online service or installs some kind of software without the knowledge of either their management or the IT staff. And I see this all the time with emails where, for example, an employee has a limitation where they can't send very large files by email. So they open up, let's say they work at Acme Company, they'll open up an email with Gmail called the employee's name, joe.acme@gmail.com, and then they use that to circumvent policies. And then sometimes the client will respond, so they'll need to start checking that email, and before you know it, they have two email addresses that they're working with. So what's the danger of that? Well, you don't know, if that email address is protected with a good password. If Joe leaves the organization, you're going to lose access to whatever is in that email. So that's one example of shadow IT. Another example are salespeople. They go and they open up online accounts and they start entering their CRM information. So as they're selling, as they're getting leads, as their funnel system, they start using these online CRM applications. The company may not be aware of them. If that employee leaves, then all that work with all those customers, all that research that's been done, that is going to go out the door. You will not have access to that. In addition, the company that's providing the service free may be mining that. So do you really want your customers or your potential customers that you're paying a salesman to work on, do you want that to be able to be mined by someone else that may sell that information? So all these are things that have to get taken into consideration, and that's why it's important that if you are going to use a particular application, it has to be whitelisted or allowed and reviewed by a committee within a company. Another thing I see very often is remote access, where an employee will install some type of remote access tool on their work computer, and then they go home and then they're able to log in to that work computer. And again, you should create policies to define what can and cannot be done. So BYOD, as we mentioned, allows employees to utilize their personal devices. Some companies allow them, others frown upon them. Create a policy defining what devices could be used for work and what services can be accessed if BYOD is allowed. Before creating a policy that allows or denies specific devices, take into consideration some of the BYOD dangers. In case there is loss, theft, or employee dismissal, these devices may not be wiped without legal repercussion. So if you have a company issued phone and the employee leaves and doesn't turn in their phone, well, you could remotely wipe that device. But if it's their personal phone, you may have a legal repercussion if you do wipe it. And imagine you wipe their personal data, or imagine they have their wedding photos on that phone, and they lose that. So you don't have control over what programs they are installing, what type of passwords they're using. They could have a password 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's nothing you could do about it. It's not your device, it's theirs. You can't really push your policies on that. You don't have the ability. You can ask them to install an antivirus, but you generally don't have the ability to enforce it. You also have the risk of having mixed personal and business that are present in the same device, and this is not good when you're commingling. And of course, you're going to have reduced productivity from lack of web controls. So create a remote work policy. Define what devices can be used to conduct business. For example, should you allow or should you not allow BYOD? Define what software can be used to access your internal network resources and your devices, and define what type of internet connections can be used. So for example, will you let them connect via their home private ISP? Who's going to be the ISP? It could, you could have a lot of faith in an ISP like AT&T or Comcast, but there are a lot of other third parties. Some people I've seen where people share network connections with their neighbors, right? So all that has to be looked at and created a policy so that make sure that there are safety measures in place. Also, will you allow those employees to connect via public hotspots? If you do, what can be done and what cannot be done, right? Will you allow them to connect to a public hotspots and then connect to your VPN or connect to your internal resources, knowing very well that you have man-in-the-middle attacks that are common, and not common, but that can be done through public hotspots. Or you may have a policy that just allows them to connect to their home internet or to their phone. Create some fundamental workplace policies. So some of the fundamentals are creating a policy to display a login message when the computer started, telling the employee that this PC is solely for business use, so that they understand that it's not for going on YouTube and watching cat videos, etc. Advise if the PC is being monitored. This is legally required. So if the PC is being monitored, if it's being recorded, if any data that's within that PC is accessible to others, the employee should be notified through a message when they first log on. Notify employees of assignment of rights on organization-owned devices, meaning that the employee has to be aware that whatever they're entering into that is the organization's personal owned information, and the organization can disclose that to other members of the organizations, etc. Create a screen lock policy and a password policy that defines how long the person could be inactive before the screen lock kicks in, and a password policy, how many characters, and it should be minimum 12. And the password policy should also include, for example, that they don't use simple password, that they don't use reuse passwords among different services. Create a resource policy, how they could use resources, right? You don't want your employees overutilizing printing if they don't have to. You don't want your employees, for example, I see where we get calls that the internet's slow, and it's because there's a lot of people that are background listening to music, or they have YouTube playing, a concert in the background, and this all takes up resources. So you should create a policy to define that as well, so that the resources are not being overutilized. Create a remote access policy and define what acceptable remote tools can be used, how they can connect remotely. You may have a policy that specifies that they can only connect to your company's assets if they VPN in with a two-factor authentication, and then they do RDP. Create a cybersecurity awareness policy that defines how often training is needed and for whom. Some employees will need more training than others. This could be defined in your policies. For example, if you take the training and you're adept at it, you don't need to take it for another year. If you take it and you don't score well, then you should take it again within 6 months. These are all policies that you could define. Again, create a web surfing policies to define what sites they're allowed to use. Create a statement review policy and append disclaimers to social media, emails, etc. So a statement review means that when one of your employees is making a statement, that should be reviewed by either a committee or somebody else. And always append a disclaimer. If you have employees that are posting to social media, or when you're sending an email, there should be a statement or a disclaimer, and I'm sure you've all seen those on emails. They're quite common. Create an asset disposal policies so that employees understand how and they should get rid of their assets. For example, not just if your laptop dies, don't just grab it and throw it in the garbage. The hard drive should be wiped or destroyed, and the asset should be taken to a recycle center. Also, part of this asset disposal policy should dictate the procedure when an asset malfunctions, and define how it's allowed to be repaired. Which repair facility can it be taken to? If it contains sensitive information, the hard drive should be removed before taking it to a repair facility, or at least the hard drive should be encrypted if you take it to the repair facility with the hard drive in place. And also so that they understand that when they take it to a repair facility, they should not give the login password to the repair facility. Create a scanned document policy so that employees understand what they can and cannot scan based on how that scanned information is being stored or transmitted. So for example, if you scan a document that contains personal or private information and the scanner sends it by email, that may not adhere to your policy. So create a document policy so that employees understand what can and cannot be scanned, and in the case of sensitive or private information, there may be a different scan process. Create an internal audit policy to ensure compliance with all your policies, because you could create all these policies, but if you're not checking and making sure that they're that employees are abiding by them, then they're not going to be effective. Create a backup retention policy. I'm not going to go into backups because it's a little bit complicated, as you can see on this chart, but do call us. We'll discuss with you what backup policy and what a retention policy and how it works. But you should define how often the backups are taken. gaps within backups are very, very important. You could take a monthly backup where you have everything available for 1 month, but then you have a 1 year backup where you could go back 1 year, but everything in between you may not be able to restore, right? So it's I don't want to get into it here, but just call us and we will help you draft a good backup retention policy and set it in place. Create a disaster recovery policy too. Again, this is something that it's beyond what I'll be able to explain here briefly, but it's to deal with cryptographic viruses, hardware, data theft, fire, hurricanes. All these things should be considered in your disaster recovery policy. One of the things that people often don't take into consideration is their recovery time objective. So if you have backups for all your data and something goes wrong, a lot of people don't realize it may take a week for, if you have several terabytes of data, it may take 3, 4, 5 days or even a week to restore all that information. If your server dies, it may take you a week or 2 weeks to purchase a new server, then set it up, then restore the data to it. So the recovery time objective is something very important that should be considered in getting you, if you want to be back up and running relatively quickly, and that should be part of your disaster recovery policy. And make sure you consider backups, offsite backups, retention for cloud services. A lot of people think that just because their data is in the cloud that it's being automatically backed up by the provider, and this is really not the case. A lot of times you are responsible. They do provide backup sometimes at an additional cost, or sometimes they provide a minimum backup with no retention past a certain period. So all these things should be taken into consideration as part of your disaster recovery policy. Also create a security breach policy, which will state how you deal with a security breach. There are many publications that can help you create protocol and policies in case of such an unfortunate incident. And this is very important because in a lot of security circles, we're being told it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So it's very important for business managers to draft a security breach policy that dictates how you're going to deal with the breach, how you are from who to hire in your investigations, how you're going to notify the public or the users that are affected. All these steps should be outlined and printed on paper, because remember, if you keep it on your systems and your systems are breached and encrypted, you will not have access to these. So print them and keep them on paper, and as part of your security breach policy. Well, thank you very much for your time, and this is the final presentation, so we thank you all for having joined.